Welcome to Chapter 2.3, Subtracting Fractions. So last time we worked on the idea of adding fractions. Well, the idea of subtracting fractions is very similar to that process. So here are some ideas to get you to remember how to go and add, and in this case, subtract fractions. So we always want to start off by finding ourselves a common denominator. In fact, we want to find ourselves a lowest common denominator if possible. It's not necessary, but it's usually a little bit more helpful to find a lowest common denominator simply because the numbers will be smaller to work with. We always want to rewrite our fractions as equivalent fractions using the common denominator, okay, before we actually go and either add or subtract. In this case, we're going to be subtracting, so we'll subtract the numerators and the denominators stay the same. Very similar process to when we were adding fractions in the previous chapter. And finally, we always want to make sure we reduce if that's possible. So here are 4 questions to start you off. So now would be a good time to pause the video to give yourself a chance to try these questions before looking at the answers. Once again, make sure you show your equivalent fractions before you reduce. Alright, so in question A here, 7/8 minus 1/3, the lowest common denominator is 24. So when we go and write our equivalent fractions, well, the 8 we need to multiply by 3. So therefore we multiply its numerator by 3 as well. So we get ourselves to 21. The 1/3 we multiply the denominator by 8. So therefore we multiply the numerator by 8. And we get ourselves to a numerator of 8. So this time we're going to subtract the numerators. So 21 minus 8 gives us 13. And our denominator stays the same at 24. So 13 over 24. In question B, 5/6 minus 1/4, the common denominator. I use 24 just to show an example, although the lowest common denominator is actually 12. So we'll see what happens if we had used a higher common denominator instead of the lowest one. So in order to get ourselves to a common denominator of 24, we multiply the 6 by a 4. So we'll do the same thing to its numerator. And that gets us to a 20. The 4 we multiplied by 6. So therefore we multiply its numerator by 6 and we get ourselves to 6 on top. So following along the process, we subtract the numerators. So 20 minus 6 brings us to 14. The denominator stays the same at 24. So of course in this case, since they're both even numbers, they'll at least reduce by 2, because both numbers are divisible by 2 because they're both even. So therefore, we get 7 on the top and 12 on the bottom. Now had we used 12 initially as our common denominator, well, let's see what happens. Well, we would have had 12 on the bottom here, minus, this one would have been a 12 as well. So if we take in the 5, well, we would have had to double it. It would have been 10. The 4 here, we would have had to triple it, so it would have been a 3. So you can see, if we subtracted the numerators, we would have had 7 over 12. Works out to exactly the same answer either way. Okay. Now this third question, C, 3/2 or 3/2 minus 3/4. common denominator is 4. Now because 3/4, it's already got the common denominator 4, then we don't need to multiply anything. So it stays as 3/4. The 3/2 we need to multiply by 2 on the top and bottom, so we get to a 6. So 6 minus the 3 brings us to 3/4. And finally, in question D, this time we have a whole number minus a mixed fraction. So my recommendation is to change the mixed number into an improper fraction. So I'll rewrite the 2 to begin with. And remember, to change a mixed number into an improper fraction, we need to multiply the denominator of the fractional part times the whole number. So 5 times 1 in this case is 5. And then we add the numerator. So 5 times 1 is 5. Add 3 brings us to an 8. The denominator remains the same. So now we need to search for a common denominator. In this case, remember that 2 is really 2/1. So therefore, our common denominator will be 5. We multiply top by 5, we get to a 10. Now 8/5 already has the common denominator, so it stays as is. So now that we've got the equivalent fractions written, we can subtract the numerators. 10 minus 8 is 2, and the denominator stays at 5. So 2/5 will be our final answer. Now here's a different kind of question that I tend to like to ask on my tests. So this one is a little bit open-ended. It says write two fractions that have different denominators but give you a difference of 2/3. So in this kind of a question, I would simply work backwards. So instead of actually subtracting, I would start off with the 2/3. Then I would add any fraction I want, but I want to add a fraction, of course, that has a different denominator. So let's say I decide to add 5/2. So following what we worked on last day, our common denominator will therefore be 6. So if I multiplied the denominator here by 2, I multiply this one by 2. So this will now be a 4. I multiply this one by 3, and therefore this one by 3. And my numerator becomes 15. So when I add the two fractions, I get 19/6. Now, if I think about it then, in terms of this question, it wants a difference of 2/3. Okay? Two different denominators with a difference of 2/3. So I'm going to take the 19/6, place it as the first fraction, and therefore if I subtracted the number that I had picked, the 5/2, then 19/6 minus 5/2 will therefore give me the 2/3. So I could check this really quickly by writing the equivalent fractions. 19/6, my LCD will be 6. So therefore, I multiply this one by 3 by 3. This will be 15. Subtract the numerators. I get 4/6, which therefore then reduces to the 2/3, which I was looking for. Now finally, using our ever so popular science teacher here, we decided to invest in some stocks. So here it says that Aaron bought some stock shares that were valued at $4.15 per share. He sold them at 5 3/8 per share. So how much did he make per share? So very simply, all you need to do is subtract the two fractions. But of course, both values are written as mixed numbers. So the first thing you should do is convert them to improper fractions. So once again, 8 times the 5 is 40, plus the 3 brings you to 43/8. The 16 times the 4, 64. Then we need to add a 15 to that, and that brings you to a 79. So now we can subtract. Actually, before you subtract, we notice that the denominators are different. So common denominator will be 16, so we need to double this top and bottom of the first fraction, so therefore it's 86/16. So now we can subtract the numerators. 86 minus 79 brings you to 7/16. So 7/16 per share is what Aaron made. Hopefully he has lots of shares so that he can actually make some money. So hopefully this section has helped you learn how to subtract fractions.